When I was 8 years old, I knew that the unicorn had missed the boat, and by the boat I meant Noah's Ark. I based my theology on the song by the Irish Rovers. I have since learned to vet my sources. In high school, I was told that the Bible was a piece of fiction because unicorns were mythological. That, of course, didn't bother me because I've already established that unicorns did exist. At university, two of the things I learned were first, that unicorns, as I understood them, did not exist, and second, I should always use the earliest sources possible. So, to the fundamentalist Christians, I present the Catholic Vulgate Latin Bible. It was commissioned by Pope Damascus in AD 382 and completed by St. Jerome in AD 405. Rather than translate the Greek Bible directly, he compiled it from existing scraps that had been translated by multiple people over the previous 300 years. This explains why the single word unicorn, which was translated into the Greek from the Hebrew rayem, turned into multiple different words in the sacred Catholic Vulgate Latin Bible, even on 2 consecutive verses. To the devoted atheist, I present the Webster's Dictionary of 1828. Since language changes over time, does it not make more sense to interpret a 400-year-old document, the 1611 King James Bible, with a 200-year-old dictionary, the 1828 version of Webster's Dictionary, rather than a modern dictionary? 400 years ago, when the writers of King James translated Hebrew and Greek scriptures into English, they only had the vaguest understanding of what a rhinoceros actually was. So rather than use the multiple references to rhinoceros in the Latin Vulgate translation, they just used a single consistent form of the Greek unicorn, meaning single horn. 200 years later, the writers of the Webster's Dictionary had a more realistic, although slightly distorted, conception of what a rhinoceros was, and from their perspective, a unicorn and rhinoceros were synonymous. In the last century, public media has become more and more sensationalized, and definitions of many words have changed dramatically over time. Decimate, whose root is deci, meaning 1/10, originally meant to remove 1/10. Gay originally meant to be jovial, animated, cheerful, and showy, or could also mean to be intoxicated. But my favorite is corn, whose original definition described the primary grain of a region. In the United States, however, it has been appropriated to define what the rest of the world called maize. Now, if you're satisfied with this answer, you can stop this video. But if you know me, you know that I was not satisfied at just stopping here. So if you're willing to suffer through the drone of my monotonous voice, have I got a story to tell you? This is a survey done in AD 1700 on the range of the giraffe at the time. It is interesting to note that giraffes, elephants, and rhinoceros share the same grassland peacefully because they do not compete with each other for food. The giraffe obviously eats the high leaves of treetops. The elephant eats the top parts of shrubs and tall grasses, while the rhino eats the short grasses and the lower parts of small shrubs. The elephant and rhinoceros have been ruthlessly hunted because of tusks and horns having been valued, while the giraffe was blissfully allowed to survive. It seems reasonable to me to assume that the range of the giraffe in 1700s would be very close to the range of the giraffe in antiquity, which would also be the ancient range of elephants and rhinos. This border closely matches the modern border between Egypt and Sudan. It is also interesting to note that the northern border of the giraffe, and presumably the rhinos, coincided with the southern border of the Middle Kingdom of Egypt that reigned from 2040 BC to 1700 BC. The trial of the biblical Job occurred approximately 1800 BC, 100 years prior to the end of the Middle Kingdom. According to the Authorized King James Bible, Job owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkey. The primary use of sheep is wool to weave textiles, milk for dairy, and meat for food and sacrificial offerings. The primary use for camels is long-distance desert transport and caravan freight. This would be the equivalent of long-haul 18-wheel trucking. The oxen were used for pulling plows, carts, and hauling lumber. Their modern equivalent would be tractors or box trucks. Donkeys were for short to medium range transport, turning millstones and riding. They could also be considered the equivalent of modern cargo vans or pickup trucks. I conclude that Job was not a farmer, but in the import-export business. Although the land of Uz is not precisely known, it is reasonable that it has been reasoned that it is in the vicinity of southern Jordan and the northwest corner of Saudi Arabia. In the beginning, he may have been considered a small-time trader. With time, he may be responsible for carrying goods between Thebes and Lower Egypt and Canaan and into Syria. As his wealth increased, the Egyptians, in order to impress this powerful man, may have invited him to spend holidays at the luxury resort in the northern Nubia area, taking a safari from the fertile banks of the Nile to the Savannah of Nubia. I expect that he would have witnessed firsthand the remarkable creatures of the giraffe, the elephant, and the ferocious rhinos and hippos. So when God ultimately speaks to Job about the wonders of God's creation, Job has a vivid picture of the futility of domesticating the black rhinoceros.